A few weeks back, it was negative 10 degrees in my city when I left to walk to work. That's negative 23 Celsius to those of you who've never had Waffle House. As soon as the cold air hit my eyes, tears started streaming down my face. I took a sip of water before I left, and the water droplets on my mustache immediately solidified into ice crystals. After walking for a bit, the inside of my nose started to feel heavy and uncomfortable, and I realized that my snot had frozen inside my nostrils. I thought about that if I wasn't bundled up and actively moving, it might not have taken long for me to freeze to death. It got me thinking about winter and the cold. See, I was just getting a taste of the cold as I walked from my warm and comfortable home to my warm, though much less comfortable workplace. I love winter. It's a cozy, nostalgic, and beautiful season. But for the vast majority of human history, it was a time of fear, hunger, and death. For our ancestors, without heating and cars and mass-produced winter clothes, each winter must have felt like a relief to survive through, and each summer must have been tinged with dread of the season to come. But there are parts of the world where winter never ends, just shifts between various shades of deadliness. The first domesticated dogs were probably sled dogs. Thousands of years ago, the inhabitants of Siberia developed a covenant with the Arctic wolves that would eventually become the Siberian Husky, a stout, thickly furred dog with the energy of a 50-pound Hadron Collider. The practice of dog mushing as the superior form of travel in Arctic landscapes spread in a kind of belt across the top of the northern hemisphere. From there, it spread to the native people of Canada, French colonial voyageurs, hopeful prospectors on their way to the Yukon, and finally the explorers and the Arctic expeditions that eventually conquered the North and South Poles. Dog mushing is a tradition as old as dogs themselves, and I think in many ways it symbolizes the human struggle to outwit nature and the elements with ingenuity and interspecies teamwork. What was the life of a dog musher like, though? A lonely life on the margins, I'd imagine. Living in places where humans were never meant to live, a leader of animals rather than men, living with his dogs, training his dogs, eating and sleeping alongside his dogs. I imagine a musher would become part dog himself. This is the world that the horror game That Which Gave Chase invites us to inhabit. The game was released rather unseasonably in June of last year by Norwegian developer Aslak Karlsen Hauglid. And by developer, I don't mean like a game development company, I mean one Scandinavian dude probably working out of his bedroom. You know, the way games were meant to be made. In That Which Gave Chase, you play as a dog musher near the turn of the 20th century, escorting a mysterious and more than a little ominous traveler who will call the explorer deeper and deeper into an Arctic wasteland. Let's get started. Our game begins in media res in a forest at dusk. The explorer is eager to push forward, and your team of huskies seems game too. Give them all the little scratch under their chin that they deserve and get going. You climb aboard the sled, let up the anchor, and get your first taste of the majority of the game's gameplay. The game is primarily a dog sledding game after all, and though you'll also occasionally be on foot, most of what you'll be seeing is your team of huskies leading you forward. If the sled was like a car, then essentially your foot is always on the gas. All you can do is steer, slow down, and lean left or right to course correct when the sled is about to tumble over. This happens a lot, and your passenger is always kind of a dick about it, which would be understandable if he wasn't also a dick about most other things. Anyways, I'm getting way ahead of myself. As you get your bearings steering the sled, the explorer cryptically alludes to you being somehow destined to work together, and vaguely implies how important his mission is. After a title drop, the game cuts to you speeding downhill in the sled through a much more barren-looking Arctic landscape. Even though it's early, this was the point in the game where I really started to appreciate how much the low-def, cursed PS1 graphics complemented the harsh, sinister setting. When the graphics are so stripped down to minimalist, it sinks in just how desolate and empty the hazy landscape of icy blue and gray is. And anyways, as you get the hang of the steering, the fast-paced descent becomes pretty fun. Sorry, but I'd really prefer if you don't look at me like that. Soon enough, you come to a cabin and lay down your anchor to explore. Here's a great chance to appreciate the game's dogs. Even though they're so low res, there is just this indescribable, authentic dogginess to them. I love how they look up at you with their pale blue eyes when you come close and that little content smile they give when you scratch them. I also appreciate how each dog has its own color pattern and that when you stray too far from them, they start howling and a little tracker appears on the screen to tell you where they are. Anyways, they're much better traveling companions than this weirdo, but they're not the ones paying us. As you approach the cabin, though, something interesting happens. The game suddenly cuts to you being led up a glacier at night by the explorer. It's incredibly jarring initially. The explorer tells you that what you're approaching is the true test, before this odd circle of fire engulfs the entire screen and you flash somewhere else. Now initially I thought the jump cut was just to skip ahead, but here we are seemingly back where we started. This is something that I think is unique and frankly genius about the game, the use of jump cuts between place and time. We've all heard of nonlinear storytelling, but it feels like the creator is doing something different here. It feels like you're experiencing different chunks of time sequentially in a random order, or perhaps all at once. The fact that jump cuts are so out of the blue and unchoreographed gives it all this dreamlike, slightly hallucinogenic feeling. I'm sure something in the game's code is triggering them, but you're not sure exactly what it is. It's not like you touch an item or open a door and the game has a jump cut. They're so subtle that even on my second and third playthrough, I couldn't always tell what was prompting them, which only enhances the dreamlike feeling. I do think you are supposed to be confused, but if you want a bit more clarity about the sequence of the game, you can load scenes in the game's main menu, which gives the title of the location for each scene, which gives a much better idea of the actual order of events. Anyways, when we jump back from the night scene of the glacier, we have a gun and are taking aim at a reindeer. Don't try to shoot the explorer though, because it breaks the laws of time and space. Once you kill the deer, you find that he was chomping on some mushrooms, which the explorer quickly pockets, and there's another jump cut to some dark and creepy woods. You can gather mushrooms here, and if you throw them on the ground, it attracts reindeer that will come out of the woods and get no-scoped by you. It's kind of creepy as you plod forward in the misty woods, occasionally shooting reindeer and hearing their bellows around you. It reminds me a bit too much of this bad fever dream I had when I was a kid when I was laid up with a fever. In the dream, I was either playing or actually in a video game that had the same graphic resolution as this, where I was walking through these dark, dreary woods with a hunting rifle. Occasionally enemies would come by and I'd shoot them, but nothing would come out of it, so I'd just keep walking. It was incredibly creepy and monotonous, and even though the memory was in the back of my subconscious, this segment captured the feeling perfectly in a way that kind of broke my brain to the point that I had to stop playing for the night. Anyways, at the end of the section, we find the explorer standing over a deer corpse beneath this oddly crucifix-like signpost. And then we get another jump cut, seemingly backwards in time, where the explorer is explaining that the signposts that dot the Arctic land were built to guide the way during an earlier expedition he went on. He says we can't trust our senses here, not even our memory. Now, thus far, I've just been talking through the game scene by scene, which I'm going to stop at this point because, the game is an hour and a half long, and experiencing the story unfold is much more interesting than me just talking you through it. So the rest of the video will just be large narrative strokes in my attempt at defogging the story of the game. The story is both very simple and austere in the amount of information you get, but incredibly deep in terms of what it's asking you to imagine. If you want to skip spoilers, go ahead to the timestamp on the screen, but hey, make sure you come back when you're done playing the game. Pretty please? Anyways, we continue trying our best to navigate the fields of ice, while the explorer provides some increasingly sinister insight into the past expedition. Everything he says seems to personify the land itself as something that is withholding its secrets and trying to mess with our senses and brains. And time itself is certainly playing tricks on us. He also keeps drinking some mysterious gamer gunk from this flask he's carrying. All in all, he seems very untrustworthy, and it always seems like he's testing us or preparing us for something. This place is the sieve, he tells us. Pass through and you shall find all your imagined woes have been left behind. But know this, the ghosts that give chase through the gray will never leave your side. He clearly considers the place transformative, but how exactly will it transform us? We also have a nice wholesome bonfire chat with him at some unrecognizable point in our journey, where he looks very normal and not creepy at all.
Look at this dude.
He tells us that on the first expedition, after becoming hopelessly lost, he noticed that despite the harsh barren landscape, the reindeer were thriving. Doesn't take an expert to guess this is something to do with the fungus they've been eating. This is touched upon again not long after, where the explorer shares how the expedition was stymied by the deer's health and constant sense of direction. No matter what happened, they always followed the herd and were intent on reaching a certain destination. So they basically abducted one and separated it from the herd, but it still knew where to go. So they mutilated it, depriving it of its senses by cutting off its ears and eyes, yet it still followed the same invisible route. I love this scene because while he's describing this horribly cruel experiment, more and more deer appear out of the fog and surround our sled while galloping, as if they're about to take revenge. Because something tells me that deer mutilation was our creepy friend's idea. Honestly, what I kept thinking about is how interesting the setting was. Not just as a horror game setting, but as a setting for a video game in general. In this setting, there's such a strong feeling of freedom and exploring the unknown. A game where you explore the setting with your team of dog sleds and interact with wildlife could honestly be kind of cozy, a sort of Jack London simulator. However, whatever fun and freedom we might feel from the game is checked by one thing: the weirdo we're traveling with. The developer really cleverly subverts the setting from one of adventure and exploration to increasing unease as we become more and more unsettled with our traveling partner. You can relate if you ever try to start up a conversation with a stranger, either in a classroom or on an airplane or somewhere else where you're stuck in close proximity, only to increasingly learn that you've initiated a connection with a creep and you were better off keeping your mouth shut and just playing Subway Surfers on your phone or something. Later, we get a jump cut to us at twilight in the woods. The explorer isn't here, so I think we can tell it's much later in the timeline than most of what we've experienced. Because he's not there to stop us, we're able to explore the cabin. Nobody's inside, but we find several notes left behind by the occupant. It's revealed that the cabin dweller, also part of the earlier expedition, got completely lost when he tried to leave. When the place chooses to give directions, we have no choice but to follow. A diary entry places the earlier expedition at March 1892. The diarist explains that writing helps him separate his own thoughts and memory from theirs. Weird. The diary also mentions some charismatic and respected leader that spurred others to join him on this journey to their own doom. I think we can guess who that leader was. When you turn to leave, there's a very unsettling note on the door that wasn't there before. In another conversation, the explorer speaks of the earlier expedition as a cause of imbalance in the land, like they were foreign bacteria on an unsuspecting host. We're treated to another scene of us without the dogs or sled scaling the glacier with the explorer, stating that all paths have been revealed to him before another fiery circle consumes the screen. When it clears, we're back at the bonfire for another cozy fireside chat. A lot is revealed here. The explorer tells us that he's been playing the part of the opposer. He talks about ingesting poison to replace old flesh with new, and that he, like us, is simply a victim of circumstance. Feels like something an LSD-addled boomer would mumble to you at a sweat lodge, but more and more is becoming clear. I'll just play the next part in full. So we've been betrayed by the person we were hired to protect. What does he mean though that he brought us here and now we will bring him out? We awake tied to a chair in the bonfire cave. Now, thanks to the graphics, I'm not exactly sure what's happening here, but it seems like we pull out mushrooms that are growing in our arms, maybe? Anyways, eating the mushrooms will restore our seriously depleted health, plus give us some odd space distorting visuals. We see the fiery circle again, and scenes we've experienced previously flash before our eyes. The cave seems to be set up as lodgings for the explorer that he's been living in this whole time. Now we see what he was luring us towards all along. He said himself that it's all been leading to this. We find a letter that gives us more insight into his motive. It details him finding us and enlisting us to travel with him. The only hint to who he's writing the letter to is this: you, who recalls everything. Remember this also. I brought him here. I am the one who should be allowed to leave. So, all along we were a sacrifice, a scapegoat. By offering us to the place, he won his own freedom to finally escape, whatever spell or curse the place had cast. His plan worked well, but we've been through a lot so far. We're not going out without a fight. With our vitality restored thanks to the mushrooms, we leave to find our dogs. The mushrooms clearly have healing properties, replacing old flesh with new, as the explorer said, but they also seem to give us some insight into the collective memory of the place and the ghosts of the past. Perhaps this is why it grants life. It allows those that consume it to live in every moment at once, and as long as they never leave the place. I know people who've ingested a bit more psychedelics than they should have who describe similar feelings where they're inhabiting multiple timelines in a random order, sequentially or all at once. We track down the explorer by following the trail from the dog sled, while also using our mushroom powers to see ghost-like traces of the explorer on our sled. This part is honestly really cool. The reality and time-breaking powers of the mushroom are an interesting idea, but must have been really daunting to put into a video game, and I feel like they accomplished this very well. Eventually, we find our sled abandoned in the woods and can follow the howls of our dog to find and retrieve each one. Just make sure you give them a quick scratch to show how happy you are to see them again. We also find a cabin that houses probably the most horrific scene we've seen all game. Inside are two shirtless corpses, one in a chair with his wrists cut and the other in bed with his stomach burned to ashes. The way these were designed is so fucking unsettling. Like, despite the low graphical quality, the explorer has a surprisingly discernible and distinctive face. These guys though have these creepy smudged doll faces. We can grab our rifle from one of the corpses and peruse the notes left behind. One note sums up the powers of the mushrooms quite well. Everything is kept safe from the noise of time. It's not so much immortality the mushrooms give us as a sort of embalming. The final note gives us a lot more context. The inhabitants of the cabin were trapped reliving the past through its eyes. Once again, that pronoun has plenty of mystery and menace to it. The notes tells us that he, and you can guess who he is, wants to bring it out, to let it do there what it has done here. So I guess that's the explorer's reasoning for bringing us here? But wait, I thought he wanted us to take his place. If we eat a mushroom while we're here, we see that he's responsible for the grisly fates of the corpses in the cabin. As we hunt for the last two dogs, we hear someone taking aim and firing at us with a rifle. Once we finally assemble all the dogs though, we can jump on our sled and get the hell out of Dodge. Thank God. Even after sniping us off our sled, the powers of the mushroom keep us alive. We have a final showdown in a very trippy but not all too hard boss fight, which I didn't expect in a game like this but totally loved. It's pretty satisfying when we get the final shot on the son of a bitch. Show him what you really think about him and grab the flask of Mountain Dew Kickstart he's always sipping on. Anyway, shooting guys in the snow is thirsty work, so let's grab a sip. At last, we get to leave this awful place. We have the corpse of the explorer on our sled, which I'm not sure why we thought is a good idea, but whatever. We get several jump cuts of our departure, including these scenes where this odd god rays are staring down at us. I don't know, maybe this is nothing, but it really seems like these aren't just innocent sun beams and that something is either watching us leave or following us. The final shot of the game is a bit puzzling, showing us mushing through the blue dusk followed by another perspective from the lower corner of our sled. So, what the fuck happened? As I said, the story of the game is fairly bare bones in terms of what actually happens, but as deep as the ocean when we try to figure out what was actually going on. Here's my stab at unpacking it after playing it a few times. Buckle up. As we know, before the game begins, a scientific expedition took place to the Arctic place. We'll call it the place, as the game does, led by a very charismatic leader with a singular vision of what he was pursuing. The expedition eventually becomes hopelessly lost and falls apart, but first the explorer finds the center of the place, and some deity or spirit or entity that lives at its heart. This entity is omniscient in the place and seems to be part of the land itself. The mushrooms allow us to tap into its consciousness and timelessness, but once you do, you can't escape. Essentially, you become amalgamated into the entity itself, like a horny male anglerfish getting absorbed by its mate. Those that eat the mushrooms lose individual personhood, and their memories are relinquished to the entity. Some of the expedition members splinter off and settle in the cabins where they're cursed with immortality, and constantly spiraling memories where they are shown everything the entity has ever observed and experienced. The explorer sets up a cave in the center of the place where the entity dwells. He seems to become its servant, or perhaps even its worshipper. Perhaps on his own initiative, perhaps on the entity's bidding, he wants to draw it out of the Arctic wasteland onto the rest of the world. However, he also seems to be trying to regain his personhood somehow and escape from the clutches of the entity, so that's a bit confusing. Eventually he meets us on the board of the place. Remember, he can't leave. We're living a lonely and purposeless existence as a musher living outside of society. Anyways, he draws us to the center of the place to use us as a sacrifice, but as we saw, we escape by using the powers of the mushroom to kill him. Now, I think his motives in seeming betrayal were a bit more complicated than just making us a scapegoat so he can escape. Remember, his consciousness belongs to the entity now. I don't think he can keep any secrets from it. I think he orchestrated every event to make it look like he was leaving us for dead, including leaving ominous notes behind. This inspired us to consume the mushrooms and the substance in his flask, thus becoming part of the entity's consciousness as well. I think he intended us to kill him all along. After all, he was just playing the role as the opposer. Besides, we don't really kill him in the true sense of the word, as his consciousness is already absorbed into the entities. I thought a lot about the game's final shot. At first I thought it might be his corpse's perspective, showing his body was still alive, but I don't think that makes sense given its placement in the corner of the sled. I think the most likely explanation is that what we're seeing is the entity's perspective that has attached itself to our sled, perhaps in the form of a mushroom that slipped through. Either way, it seems that we are the ones leading the entity out of its Arctic prison and into civilization. The explorer got his wish. And I'm thinking of the title of the game, That Which Gave Chase. At first glance, nothing is chasing us, which makes the title kind of odd. Rather, that which gave chase is the thing on the periphery, the thing we never truly see, the thing that every one of the explorer's monologues is actually about. That which gave chase is the entity itself, the omniscient, all-encompassing being that plays with our senses, gets us lost, shows us visions, and guides us, little by little, into its burning heart. Or maybe we did see it. That circle of flame, the glow of the explorer's bonfire, the fire that survives within the freezing wind and ice, is perhaps the eye of the entity itself, watching us everywhere we go, and making sure we know it. It's a confusing, mysterious story, and I honestly loved it. I can't think of many video games where I had to sit down and pore over my notes just to figure out what was going on. What I love about it is that it's this incredible slow burn cosmic horror story of some ancient unknowable god that is always just behind the margins, but the story we actually experience is a very uncomfortable but commonplace one of a conflict between employer and employee. A basic story of survival and betrayal that hides something much more terrible behind it. It reminds me a lot of that movie The Lighthouse in that way. I might not have gotten everything right, but I love trying to piece together everything. And the incredible aesthetic and atmosphere of the game made returning to it multiple times to get the information I needed that much more satisfying. It's not a perfect game, of course. As one Steam reviewer points out, it almost feels like the game should have been either a good bit shorter or a good bit longer. There were some features like these hidden signposts you come across that didn't pan out to be all that important. But I'm honestly nitpicking. As a standalone horror, adventure, dog sledding simulator game, That Which Gave Chase stayed with me much longer than its hour-ish long runtime. And I can't wait to see what the developer has in store next. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for your time, dear viewer. I wish you all the good fortune in the world. I remain your faithful snuggler.
Rip Squad.